Yeah, that is a really great question. And I mean, the overall thing that I would do differently, I've just described, if I could make a one particular change, uh, I think it would be a change in myself in that you really need, when you're doing these things, to realize your worth. And that's, an easy thing to say, and I'm certainly not the first person to say that, but I think you need to realize in yourself what you're bringing to the business.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Founder. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. You ever need help with yours? Just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Matthew Salter. And Matthew started his founding journey, not necessarily didn't really want to or set up a business to get started or start out setting up the business. And at the time was employed with a good company. But when that business reorganized, they changed out a number of people, and he happened to be one of those casualties, so to speak. And so need another job, and started looking for outlets to support himself and also keep green card applications. So decided to start his consultancy while looking for other jobs, and then ended up continuing on and building it from there. So with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Matthew.
Hello, Kevin. Thanks for having me on the podcast, and thanks for the introduction.
Absolutely. So now, just as a quick reminder to the audience, so we do have, or Matthew's been on a couple of our sister podcasts, both the Inventive Journey and the Inventive Expert. So if you haven't had a chance to go catch his full episodes there, definitely encourage you to go and check out those. But for today, let's go ahead and dive into a bit of the founding journey. So rewinding, just kind of as I'd mentioned, at the time, kind of prior to starting the current business, you were at another company, and it was a good job at the time, and didn't have any intent necessarily of starting a new business. So kind of walk us through how that got started.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great introduction. As you said, and winding a step back, even maybe a step before that, as your viewers can probably tell, I'm not originally from America. I came to the United States in 2016. Previously, I've been living and working in Tokyo, Japan, and had spent a lot of my career both in my academic work and in my work in publishing in the Asia Pacific region. And I had a great opportunity to come to the States to take up a senior position at a top level academic publishing house as essentially their chief of publishing, and had a wonderful experience and got a lot of great work done with a great team. Built infrastructure and all good things like that for about 5.5 years. And then as part, as you said, of a reorganization, which was really part of a long-term project I'd been developing, my position was changed. There were a lot of changes at the organization, and I exited in November 2021. And so at that point, as you mentioned, I was then without a job, and also still at that point without a green card. And my family circumstances are a little complicated, and that would have, if I'm not successful at obtaining a green card or finding another job, I can't stay, of course, in the United States, and that would have been really pretty catastrophic for my family and my own career. And so one of the avenues suggested to me was to become a consultant. And so I am a consultant now. I founded Akabana Consulting. For your viewers who maybe haven't seen the other two episodes you mentioned, Akabana is the Japanese word for red flower. So we have a family connection to a prefecture whose flower is red. And so that seemed like as good a name as any. And so I founded Akabana Consulting to offer consulting services to the scholarly publishing industry and related industries, and also business development, as well as things like interpreting and language services. And we actually got that started and registered in Maryland, where I live and work, in December 2021. and we
Now,
can go
just
ever since.
yeah, and to follow up just a little bit with that. So certainly understand from the sense of okay, gotta want to stay, green card, keep that active, keep in compliance with that, and wanting to make sure that that was, that there was an option there. Now, as you're saying, okay, one option, at least, at the time, temporarily or in the short term, was to go into consultancy. Now, how did you kind of decide what consultancy you're going to do, or where you're going to focus on it, or kind of what that would look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have a number of different experience sort of portfolios in my career, and so it seemed to me that what I had just been doing at a high level, working in academic publishing. So for some of your viewers who may not be familiar, academic publishing, the kind of academic publishing I did was to publish peer-reviewed articles in journals. So these are the kind of things that researchers in universities and government institutions read and use to further their research. There is a large industry involving commercial organizations and also non-profit organizations, which make sure that all that happens, that information is discoverable and readable and accessible and so on. And there's a lot of technology that goes along with that. It's a pretty complex industry, and it's absolutely essential for global research that it all works as smoothly as possible. And so that's an area I've been working, up to that point in my publishing career. And I saw a number of opportunities to offer advice or to offer my services to give publishers more bandwidth so that they may not have enough manpower and enough staff time or staff resources to accomplish some of their tasks. I can help with that. I can help with advice, I can help with introductions, I can help with a whole range of things. And so really that's where I thought I was strongest at that point in time, and I could leverage my connections within the industry in both America and in Europe and also in Asia.
So now you say, and I think that makes sense. You go, if you're going to start a consultancy, play to your strengths and also your network and that. Now that always sounds good in theory. Now, when you actually have to go and start asking people for money or to pay you for consultancy work or otherwise, get that up and going and get the infrastructure and figure out costing model and kind of all of those things, that's where a lot of the work begins. And so walk us through. So now you say, okay, here's kind of what I'm going to focus on or what that's going to look like. How did you go and turn that into a consultancy or to that business?
You absolutely put your finger on one of the most the things I've had the most difficulty with, and I think a lot of people struggle with, is actually how to price projects in things like consultancy. If you have a business which makes a physical product, then you have costs. You know what staff costs are. You know what your materials costs are, distribution, and all of those. Legal costs and so on and so forth. But in consulting, we don't make a physical product in the sense. Our product is it might be a campaign, an advertising campaign. It might be a report document, which is electronic, and therefore we don't. I don't make hundreds and thousands of copies of the reports that I produce. So it's really hard to know how to start, doing that kind of pricing. And so I started I was very fortunate that the people I know in the industry, when I informed them that what had happened, that I was going private, they were extremely generous with their time to help me out and give me advice. The scholarly publishing industry is a relatively small industry. There are not hundreds of thousands of people who are in a strategic position or in a leadership position. So it's quite a close-knit community, and people were very generous with their time. And I got a lot of information from them, and I essentially asked some people who I know are consultants or people who have worked with consultants, and also thinking with my experience of having worked employing consultants when I was on the other side of the table, if you like, to suggest an hourly rate, which I thought was a fair market rate. I tested that out with a few people, and they came back with essentially confirming what I thought would be a useful hourly, and a fair hourly rate is indeed that. So that's how I base things in terms of hourly rate. Now, when it comes to a project, it's really difficult to know how many hours it's going to take many times. So in some places, I work with people who have a day rate, and they set that at a certain number of hours. But actually estimating how many hours a project's going to take is difficult. And looking back now, I noticed that I took some payment for sort of individual one-off payments for a project, a fixed payment. And when I look back at how many hours I spent, the hourly rate isn't that high, because in the early part of my consulting career, I didn't know. I find it hard to estimate how much time it would take, and so I kind of underestimated at times. So it's really been some trial and some error. But I now, when you have established something, you feel you're in the right ballpark, because you don't want to overcharge and put yourself out of running. You don't want to leave money on the table, and finding that happy medium where you can start is a challenge. Yeah, absolutely.
No, it makes perfect sense, and that usually is kind of an iterative process, at least from my perspective or experience, is that you'll kind of say, okay, here's maybe the initial hourly rate or fixed fee, whatever that model is that you intend to originally pursue, and then you figure out, hey, maybe I'm way overcharging versus what the market is or willing to accept, or vice versa, I'm way undercharging and I could charge a lot more for my services for what the market is expecting. And so walk us through a little bit of that iteration. You get things going, you get that kind of initially figured out, and then how did the business evolve a bit over time, or if it did, maybe you got it perfect the first time, but walk us through a little bit of if there was a bit of that evolution.
Well, I certainly didn't get perfect the first time. I wish I could say I did. Yeah, I made a number of, I guess you could call them mistakes, but I try to think of them as going through learning experiences. I don't think I've ever overcharged. I think it's been more on the other side of things that I've underestimated how much time things would take. And the one thing I would say to anyone thinking of going to a business like consulting is to really be extremely clear with the client and have talk, very openly with the client about exactly what's expected of you and the depth of a project you want to go into. So, for example, I remember doing one project when I first started, which I thought was, it was a one-off project. It had a fee attached to it. And therefore, it seemed to me like quite a good payment. I think I spent way too much time on that project, partly because I enjoyed it, partly because it was an early client and I wanted to give the client, their money's worth and a bit extra. And the actual upshot of that was the project was delineated in stages. And because I was so open to doing additional work, and also because I probably went into more detail than I needed to, the project got delayed and additional factors came in which delayed the project further, which meant actually that I couldn't complete 100% of what we'd agreed to complete, which meant that part of the project was shelved. So not only did I work too much for money, I didn't manage to work out all of the budget. So that was, the client I think got a great project, but what I would do differently now is to be very clear and say, look, for this type of, what are you envisaging? Are you envisaging something of this level of detail? What kind of deliverables do you want? How much of, what additional services would you like? And have that very, frank discussion so that you don't risk disappointing the client, but you also don't sort of overdo things. And that means that you're using time on one project that you could be on other projects. So I think, the money, and it wasn't the huge percentage. I mean, we got, probably left 15% of the project money on the table, which hurts, but it wasn't, it's not the end of the world. It didn't finish me. But it meant that, I'd used time and energy in a place which was non-remunerative. And really, I should have, I got interested in the project. It's a project in an area which I think is important, and I really sort of spent too much time on that. The client was happy with the detail they got. I actually completed all of the project for them, even though they didn't pay me for some of it, because I had promised to deliver. And, even though, part of that project was not remunerated in the end, I wanted to, make sure that they got everything that they had asked for. It brings me on to another point, which is very often when you start in the kind of consulting that I do, where you have a network, very often these people, they've been your peers. Many of them are your friends. And therefore, sometimes it's very difficult to have that discussion and say, well, this is how much it's going to cost you. If you want something else, I'm going to have to charge you more. because you tend to want, because they know, especially in a small industry, word of mouth, what you want them to be saying is, well, we worked with this guy and he did a great job, or she was fantastic on here. They really went the extra mile for us, which is great. But long term, it's probably setting you up for expectations which it's going to cost you to maintain. The flip side of that, of course, is that there is nothing like having a good reputation, and nothing more helpful than having satisfied customers who can report to you. So it's a trade-off, but it's one that I found quite difficult to get right. I think I'm on a good track now, but at the beginning that was certainly an issue that I had some difficulty with.
No, and I think that, to your point, is if it's someone that you don't have much of a relationship with, or you don't, and I'm going to put in quotes care. It's not that you don't care about them, but you don't have that personal one-on-one relationship or a long-standing relationship. Telling them, hey, I need to be paid for my work, definitely makes sense. But I'd like, to your point, is as you establish more of a relationship, as you get deeper into that, and you know them on a personal level, or their wife, or kids, spouse, those type of things, and it becomes, I think, to your point, a lot harder to just simply say, hey, you need to pay me more. Not that they or most time they're pretty understanding in that, but it's just, I think, more difficult a lot of times to say, hey, this isn't going to work out, or the pricing structure doesn't necessarily have that. So I love the hit on that, because I think that's definitely a truism. So now walking us through just a little bit. So you got got the business started, you got everything going, and then from there, walk us through a little bit, kind of where things are at today. And now, as you founded it, how long has it been in business? Because I don't know if we touched on that, but also kind of how are things going, and where do you see things headed?
Yeah, so I mean, we just in December last year, and I can hardly believe we're in March already. It seems like time is just flying by. We celebrated our second anniversary at the end of December 2023, so we're in year 3 now, and things are going well. I have a number of active clients. Last year, I think we mentioned this in the previous podcast, and I may be preempting the question for this podcast of, what was the biggest thing I would have done differently up to now? Is that I was very fortunate in my first year to get a number of well-paying clients. I mean, I made easily into 6 figures in my first year, which for a one-man operation, from a standing start, is I was pretty happy with that. But what that brought me was a lot of work, which is terrific. But also, as I mentioned before, I needed perhaps to ration my time a little more, and perhaps be a bit more consistent with how I apportion my time for things. But the key mistake, I think, the key thing I think I would do differently in year 1 is to spend more time, in fact, some time, and I really didn't do enough of this, actually, connecting with other people within the business in terms of things like trade shows. In my business, there are a lot of conferences for publishing. There are a lot of learned society conferences that you can participate in, not just to get the latest information and to meet with contacts and keep up with the latest trends in the industry, but to advertise your presence. And because scholarly publishing is largely still very kind of human, it's a human business in a sense that we're not doing this as a B2C. The person in the supermarket will never buy any of my services unless they happen to be in scholarly publishing. I bump into them when I'm doing my grocery shopping. It's not something you can advertise and people will go, we'll switch brands or anything like that. It's very much a person-to-person thing. And I was busy in my first year. I didn't want to not realize revenue. And also, I wasn't sure of how much I was going to make. And I had this feeling in my mind that the conferences I used to go to when I was in my previous organization, for which I had a budget for travel and accommodation and registration, all of the expenses that come with attending these events, in my mind, it was kind of coming out of my own pocket, which is true, but also the better way to see that from my point of view would have been that is a valid investment in business. I noticed from your portfolio that you've had a number of really diverse businesses that you've started, and some of those will actually have, I can see here you have a food truck business, right? So with a food truck, you need to have a truck, you need to have workers, you need to have, product and all the rest of it. So but you would purchasing that, you would think of that as investing in the business. Well, for me, it's going to conferences and buying rounds of drinks and talking to people and going out to dinner and just traveling to cities and staying. So I didn't do it really any of that in my first year. And the result was that when my projects that I was doing in year one came to an end, I basically had no pipeline or very little pipeline in year two. And so that meant that year two was last year. And that meant that really up until halfway through last year, I didn't really, I mean, I made very low four figures, in the first 6 months of the year. And that was purely because I hadn't taken care of the pipeline enough. And so when it's business school 101, and I just had my head down, earning money and doing projects and maintaining my LinkedIn page and doing my website and stuff. And then I thought, look, I have to start going to these conferences. And I went to a conference, very well-known conference. I managed to hustle my way into one conference. Hang out in the break room and park my business card around and meet with people and go out to lunch with them. Another one, I paid money and traveled across to Portland, Oregon, and stayed for a week, which cost money. But it meant that as a result of attending that second conference, my return on investment was about 20-fold. I got 20 times the value of business ordered from that one conference. And that's a pretty return on your money. And so I've now, as a result of that, I picked up one other business, which allowed me to go to an international conference in Europe, which is the number one conference in my industry, paid for by a customer client to do work with them, but also to attend other events. So it and as a result of that, I've got the connections and the contracts I have now.
Oh,
so
awesome.
that is how it developed. But I should have done that in year one. Can't get that back, but it's doing well now.
No, makes perfect sense. Sounds like took some time to figure out. It is one of those where, hey, if you're buying something physical, tangible for the business, you say, okay, I understand I need this or I can't do it. When it gets kind of more of investing in yourself or the intangibles or the networking and that, I think sometimes people struggle because you don't immediately see that whatever you have in hand or that physical or that tangible thing. And so I think that's definitely a great piece of advice and great takeaway. And it kind of hit on the last question, or the question I always wrap up with each, but I'll also give you an opportunity, maybe give a follow-on answer, an additional thing to hit on. So the question I always like to wrap up each episode with is, so if you go back to the early days of your business, I know you just kind of talked about it, what would be the one decision you'd make differently?
Yeah, that is a really great question. And I mean, the overall thing that I would do differently, I've just described. If I could make one particular change, I think it would be a change in myself, in that you really need, when you're doing these things, to realize your worth. And that's an easy thing to say, and I'm certainly not the first person to say that, but I think you need to realize in yourself what you're bringing to the business. And let me explain that a little further. I tend to be someone, who does not realize that they're in charge of things, in the sense that I used to be an academic. And so when you're working in a laboratory, very often, you just get on with your own work. Things are changing now, but you get on with your own work. And so the idea that people are employing me as an expert, and they introduce me as an expert, and they mean it. And I think I have a little imposter syndrome, because sometimes I kind of like, me? But actually, I am the expert in this particular field. You're the expert in your field. And I think when we need to go into these things, we need to not be arrogant in any way, but to go and say, I'm worth the however many $100 a month, an hour you're paying me, and I need to give you work which lines up with that kind of value. So I think I wasted time in the past by doing sort of unnecessary administrative work, for example, to deliver the product, when really what they paid me for was my expertise and knowledge. And I think having a better view and a realistic view of what you bring and how you're regarded, and enjoy that, and actually value that about yourself and your business, especially when you're not making a physical product. If you make apple pie and you make phenomenal apple pie and everyone's posting it on social media saying this guy's apple pie is like the greatest, or I just have like Devon just gives you the greatest advice on IP law, he's your go-to guy, right? That's not a physical product, but it's a great service that people will talk about. And I think realizing that that is what you're building, that it's an onward. And also I'm a little bit going off the topic. One thing I would do differently is I think I would be kinder to myself. I think it's very easy when you are having your own business and you have more experience in this than I do, to when something goes slightly wrong is to beat yourself up about it too much. And for me, the right response is to say, okay, that wasn't perfect, but nobody died. We know now, yes, I could have made an extra $10,000 on that project. That's going to hurt, but let's just make sure that doesn't happen again. And how can I improve my service? How can I, just the other day, I realized that a client needed to have information presented in a different way. I may have to invest in some new software for that, but that's okay because now I know that, and that means that I can serve people better. I get repeat. So it's rather than feeling bad that I didn't supply it in a particular way, I know now what I have to do. So I think being kind to yourself is, and actually enjoying the fact that you might be able to take a break at 11 o'clock and go and walk the dog, or whatever it is you do, or you might be able to pick your kids up at daycare. I mean, my kids are high school students now, but I know you have young children, so and the flexibility this gives this to you.
No, I think that, yeah, definitely a ton of a great piece of advice and great takeaway. And I like how, one of the things I think if you're to go a lot of times early on in the business, you either way overvalue or say over your value, but most of the time, to your point, it's kind of like, well, I'm not really the expert, or how can I charge this much, or you almost kind of have that guiltiness. But if you're looking and say, no, I'm adding value to their business, I'm actually providing a valuable service that's going to increase their bottom line, and then going with that approach and that understanding, I think that definitely has that difference in mindset that can be impactful and positive to the business. So I think that's a great one to look back and to learn from. Well, as we now do wrap up the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Yeah, so I have a website which I think gets a part of this when it goes out. Is www.akabanaconsulting.com. You can send me a message through there. My email, which is again accessible through there, is Matthew with 2 T's, METTHEW @akabanaconsulting, again one word.com. You can follow Akabana Consulting on Twitter or X, as it's now called. Also, you can follow me, Matthew Salter, on LinkedIn. So please feel free to reach out any and all of those media, and I'd be really happy to talk, swap stories, and have you as a client. That would be great.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out, support a great business, and make their network, and if nothing else, make a new best friend. So with that, thank you again, Matthew, for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you, their listeners that are out there, if you have your own journey to share and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. So just go to inventiveguest.com, apply to be on the show. A couple more things as listeners, make sure to click share, subscribe, leave us a review. Helps us to reach even more startups and small businesses to help them along their journey to success. And if along those lines, you ever need help with your patents or trademarks or anything else, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Well, thank you again, Matthew, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Excellent. Thanks very much. See you soon. Bye-bye.